Good afternoon. Our apologies for the delay. We had a little technical glitch, but we're over that now. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm Steve McDonald. I am the director of the Africa program and of the project on leadership and building state capacity. We're delighted to have you here today and to be a co-host for and a supporter of the program we're having today with our partner, the South Africa-Washington International Program for Service and Leadership. This is the second year that we have been involved in helping to host and co-sponsor this event. And we're delighted to do it. This year, of course, our title is Driving the African Century, Youth, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. Before we begin the program, I do want to say a personal note and an institutional note particularly to the South Africans in the audiences, but to his constituency the world over, how much we are praying for and hoping for the good health and recovery of Madiba, of Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa. I had the wonderful pleasure and great honor of working closely with him at different times in our lives. I've been working and living in South Africa since 1976. I feel it's very much a part of my home. My wife is South African, my youngest son born in South Africa. I've established some roots there, and Mandela has been, of course, a very, very deep and meaningful part of my life, and I know that we all are watching our social information devices to follow the news on what's happening with him, as we all are. So my outreach and our caring want to express to you as South Africans and to your fellow countrymen at home and to the world for the hopeful recovery of this wonderful, wonderful man and this wonderful leader who's set such examples for us all. So my role is just one to welcome you. The Wilson Center is the living memorial to former President Woodrow Wilson, established by Congress in 1968. We are established on the principle that Woodrow Wilson, as the only president in America to ever have a PhD, to be a real academic, as you probably know, he was president of Princeton University, all this before his public life. And he very much cared about the need to bring together the world of ideas, as he called it, and the world of policy. In other words, to bring experts, academics, practitioners, those who live and work within the policy frameworks that are established by those who make those laws and make those policies in capitals like Washington, D.C., London, and Pretoria. And so that's what we're here in the spirit of and trying to do. And tonight is a very good example. Today and tonight are very good examples of bringing together these communities. So I'm going to now turn the podium over to my co-host, Karen Stratum, who is the board chair for the South Africa-Washington International Program for Service and Leadership. In her real life, she's the principal strategy officer for International Finance Corporation, and she will be giving you a welcome and then begin the program for us. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Steve, for that introduction, and thank you for your ongoing partnership in putting this event together. And we also want to have a shout out to the South African Embassy for helping us put this together. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is indeed Karen Stratum. I'm a proud South African. I'm also privileged to be this year's chair of the US board of SOWIP, and we also have friends from our South African board in the audience, and welcome to them. So, yes, so thank you for coming on a hot afternoon, but it's going to be a cool place, so you come to the right place. I want to give a shout out to all the panelists who came from near and far, but especially the ones who came from far. And there are three that I want to single out. So Andile Nkaba, he came from South Africa. Lawrence Yanovich, I believe, if he's here, he flew in from Paris, and then David Frankel from Boston. But everyone, each and everyone, very welcome. So, yes, how things have changed, right? That we can have a theme like driving the African century through youth entrepreneurship and technology. And it's also a very fortuitous time because we are just ahead on the eve of President Obama's visit to South Africa. And as Steve then mentioned also, we have to acknowledge what's happening back at home, that Madiba is in critical condition. And of course, this brings with it a bit of somberness and some reflection on a giant's life. But what better way to actually celebrate his life and his values by spending time like you're doing with the SAWIP class of 2013, who is a wonderful example of the new generation of leaders who are true ambassadors to Mandela's leadership values. So without more ado, I welcome you to a truly inspirational afternoon. And before the panelists start, I'm going to take the time, because maybe not everyone knows SAWIP that well, to play a little video for you.
This network of South Africans is set to, I think, affect great change in South Africa, and I think people should want to be a part of that.
And seeing life here, seeing American politics, and speaking to inspirational people about entrepreneurship and civil rights and human rights and dignity, the world has been open to me that I never knew existed.
Almost 2 decades after the end of apartheid, South Africa still faces daunting challenges, including the significant gaps in social and economic equity that continue to exist. The need for a new generation of leaders to bridge these gaps in South Africa is great. The South Africa-Washington International Program is helping to inspire, develop and support this new generation of diverse young leaders who are service-oriented, socially conscious and globally aware to address these challenges in South Africa and beyond. SAWIP selects a diverse group of outstanding South African university students each year to participate in a 6-month program of intensive leadership skill building and cross-cultural immersion. As a part of their training, students spend 6 weeks in Washington, D.C. and New York City, living with host families and gaining a deeper understanding of global leadership challenges by working alongside and being mentored by political, business, civic and non-profit leaders. Our unique program promotes interaction among and between student leaders from South Africa and emerging young leaders from around the world. In the process, historical divisions are overcome, values are shared, and the roots of democratic political ideals are more firmly established. SAWIP's exceptional young leaders are already making their mark in South Africa. Our growing network of alumni includes a diverse and highly skilled group of engineers, attorneys, social entrepreneurs, business, civic and non-profit professionals. Join us to help these emerging leaders who, in a few years' time, will be at the forefront of building a better South Africa and making positive contributions globally.
You cannot, I don't think, sincerely come into this program and leave the same person that you started out as. It's life-changing stuff.
One of the things I've learned is just how it feels to be on the inside. So in South Africa and in Africa, often we feel like we're on the outside trying to break in. And here we're in structures of global governance which affect change on the world from the inside. And so I think once you understand those structures from the inside and you're not sort of standing back from this tall building looking up on it as it sort of like reaches into the clouds, you're actually sitting in the top floor, so to speak. You get a deep insight into, when you go back into your country, how you can form symbiotic relationships with South Africa, Africa, and the centers of power on the inside.
Every single day, I'm just like, thank you, Lord, that I'm here, because it's really an amazing program, and love every moment of it.
The discussions that we've had have been invaluable. The people that we've met have imparted immense depth of wisdom and knowledge onto all of us. However, the most important thing that I've got out of this experience is speaking to my fellow team members about issues that we all feel passionate about in South Africa. The passion that I see in myself, I see in them. The passion I see for future South Africa, they share with me. The passions that we have for equality, they share. And that is by far the most beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, that was fun, wasn't it? So without further ado, Alu Msese. Alu, he's the envoy of His Excellency Ambassador Rasool.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Karen. Well, you know, it's a pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, for hosting this wonderful event, your partnership in partnering with SAWIP, and of course, the wonderful work that the board is doing, the sponsors, the SAWIP students themselves. I mean, we are all here because of the students themselves, to celebrate them, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I think that the work that, speaking on behalf of, let me go back, speaking on behalf of Ambassador Rasool, he couldn't be here today because, as Karen has already noted, President Obama is visiting South Africa. And that's a very historic visit. And at the government level, we're very excited and all happy that President Obama will be visiting South Africa. And we believe that out of that visit, at the government level, we're going to be able to build our relationship further and expand and bring economic prosperity for both the people in South Africa and the people in the United States. However, the reality of it is that you can do all the government-to-government work that you want. You can sign agreements between governments, but it's really the people who actually make these agreements to be a success or a failure. It is through programs such as SAWIP that really actually shows you the will of the people, that people go out there and connect at an individual level. That makes the relationship between South Africa and the United States to become what it is. It is the families that actually host the students that come from South Africa that actually make us as embassies to can be able to say that we have a good, positive bilateral relationship between South Africa and the United States to be true. Because if the people are not interacting, you can't say that you have a good relationship. You can have it in paper, but it's the people themselves. It's the board members that have dedicated their time, that have become visionaries, and they had this vision of making sure that they can impact the lives of young leaders from South Africa. And that is one thing that we really appreciate as the embassy. If Ambassador Rasool was here himself, he would definitely say that he's proud of the work that you're doing. You're really making a difference that is much needed in South Africa. As you know, we all know, our former president and our dear former president, Madiba, is in hospital right now. And of course, all our prayers and our hearts goes towards him, you know. But, you know, in his wisdom, in his autobiography, one of the things that Madiba said was, education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that the son of a mine worker can become the head of the mine, that a child of a farm worker can become the president of a great nation. It is what we make out of what we have, not what we are given, that separates one person from another. In this kind of wisdom that Madiba had to share with the world, you begin to glean and understand that when you're given an exposure as a SAWIP student, I think this is a great opportunity to learn, to be educated, to be exposed, to see the world in a different way, to get views from other people and see and begin to understand how other people look at the world. It's a wonderful opportunity that you have been given. And being given this wonderful opportunity, it also means that you've also been given a responsibility. It goes beyond just you having an opportunity. It goes to a point where you're given a responsibility. And what is the responsibility that you're given? You are given a responsibility to go back home to South Africa and bring about positive social change. I believe all of you have been identified as leaders. And leaders are people who are supposed to impact or supposed to lead and create followers for positive change in their own communities. And one thing that I believe that you do have that is very, very important is that, you know, you have tenacity, you have energy, you have vision, you have wisdom. If it wasn't for that, you would not have been selected for this program. And you were selected for that reason so you can go back into South Africa and bring about positive change. And what South Africa is really looking for in this day and age, we are looking for young, talented, visionary people who have the spirit of entrepreneurship, who go beyond this whole thing of I'm waiting for the government to do something. You know, as we all know, it is often been said that, you know, don't ask what your government should do for you, but you must always ask, what can I do for my government? And it is for this reason that the SAWA program has brought you here. So when you leave, when you go back to South Africa, you should be able to bring about positive change that will last forever. And I think we are living in a day and age where technology makes being, you know, a pioneer, makes being a leader, makes being a visionary much more easier, because it's so much easier to learn. I believe when you leave this place, you'll be able to connect with friends. That even when you're in South Africa, distance won't matter anymore. It will just be to drop an email. You can go on Twitter and you can share ideas as to how do we deal with the issues that we're faced with in South Africa. And you can use social media to mobilize people for positive change in South Africa. And beyond South Africa, you can mobilize people to bring positive change in Africa and in the rest of the world. There are no limits to what you can do in this day and age. And as often as we always talk about the riches of Africa, the mineral resources and the land resources, I believe that the best and the most important resource that Africa has is its young people. We have the best of the brilliant minds. But what we need to do is to begin to move out of just talking about we are brilliant and all that, and go out there and begin to do things that brings about positive change. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that, and do give our regards to Ambassador Rasool. We're sorry he couldn't be with us, but we fully understand the reason and support it. Okay, we're going to move right into our first panel. We are a little bit stretched for time, so we're going to try to move through promptly. Just one word that on sort of housekeeping, that is, we are being webcast live. So when we get to the discussion, question and answer stage and everything else, be sure to wait for a microphone to come your way, identify yourself so that the listening and watching audience can see you. So with no further ado, let me introduce and invite up to the podium Richard Sergey, Senior Vice President, Media Development and Strategies, sharecare.com, and a former ABC South African Bureau Chief, who is going to, and the panel members, Renosa Makati, who is there on the screen, Mwangi Kamenye, and Rick Johnson. And I'll let Richard introduce them. By the way, I might point out, particularly with Ms. Mokate being here, one special guest we have in the audience, and that is a member of my Africa Council for the Africa program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, but former Vice President for Africa for the World Bank, Callisto Modavo.
Thanks, Steve. Renosa, can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Good. What could possibly go wrong? So thank you for that introduction. And since time is limited and you all have all of our biographies, I'm not going to bore you with introductions. We'll just get right to it. So the way I see moderating this, and I'd really like this to be a conversation over the next 45, 50 minutes, is that each of our experts here will speak for about 5 minutes on the global issue of our quite audacious topic, which is Africa's possibilities in 2023. We've chosen that year. Why? Well, we'll figure that out. But before we start, Rick was kind enough to give me the White House briefing before the president leaves, and there were a couple of paragraphs that I thought were incredibly important that we just ought to reprise here briefly. And one is that says, and this is from White House spokesman, "We see Africa as one of the most important emerging regions in the world and a place for the U.S. to significantly increase our engagement in the years to come. There are growing economic opportunities there for increased trade and investment and increased engagement." And to me, one of the most important paragraphs is, I think you'll also see a focus on young people. Africa has an extraordinarily large youth population, and it's important for the United States to signal our commitment to investing in the future of African youth. And this, too, is part of unleashing development on the continent, because if you have young people who are able to access opportunity and able to shape the direction of their countries, it's going to be in the interest of Africa and the United States as well. And I don't think the spokesman could have said it any better. So why don't we start? I always like to go left to right. That's my left. Oh, yeah, that's right. So Renosi, why don't you begin with a few minutes of high level on this topic that we're about to dive into.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the opportunity to join you in this conversation. I think just going back to Karen's comments about the significance of our having this conversation at this time, as we are all thinking of our former president, Nelson Mandela, I'm reminded of the role that he played as a young person, as a member of the African Youth League. And I think that the kind of energy, fearlessness, creativity, and tenacity that his generation of youth and dynamism that it brought to the organization is something that we should always keep in mind, and in my view, remains a recurring theme as we think about youth and the transformative role that they have played in various societies. As we look forward to 2023, I think that some of the challenges that we face now will continue to be with us. And if they're going to change, if we're going to see a change in those challenges, the youth is going to be important. I'm thinking, for example, of the fact that in many on the African continent, even though we have had a wave of democratization, what we do see is that there are still pockets of conflict and fragility that persist. And in the process, there are segments of youth that are actually being negatively affected and for whom 2023 will remain looking bleak. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the youth that have had the opportunity to be in, we have youth that have had the opportunity to be in various countries that have democratized, and we've seen the kind of important role that they have played using their social entrepreneurship and technology, not only to democratize access to information, but to bring to bear the use of technology to make governments more accountable and to enable citizens to participate more effectively in those new democracies. So for the ones that are already in the democratized societies, I think their role going forward is to look at what is happening in the countries that are lagging behind and how they all pull together to make the continent a better place, and then internally to increase social cohesion, nation building in the societies that they are in. Just take that theme forward. I think that another important aspect of our future is how the different segments within our society, business, the non-governmental sector, and the private sector work together. We tend to work in our own silos, and I think in the process are losing a lot of opportunities to make 2023 a period of time really addressed poverty and inequality effectively and created a better living condition for the many people on the continent. Technology will play, in my view, a very important role in breaking down those barriers. And here I'm counting on the youth with their comparative advantage around the use of mobile technology and social media to help us lift our game as far as working together to fast track finding solutions and scaling up solutions to address unemployment, many challenges that we face. If we give our youth the scope, and if we engage in constructive and useful cross-generational dialogue, I believe we'll be able to create a better future for the continent and for our country. But take our generation working closely with the youth, and the youth, again, building on that legacy of Nelson Mandela, using their creativity to push the boundaries and drag all into 2023 as a much better society. I'd like to stop there.
Thank you. Well said. Rick?
Thank you, Richard. And my thanks to SAWEB for inviting me to be here today, as well as to the Woodrow Wilson Center. First, I'd like to acknowledge a dignitary who just arrived, And I'm going to do it in a somewhat self-serving way. Citi is one of the founding members of the U.S. South Africa Business Council. It was just formed under the auspices of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And we've been very, very fortunate to persuade Ambassador Gibbs, who's with us, to serve as our chairman. So I think it's a good step forward and an indicator of where things can go when you can lure that kind of talent into serving the business community. A few points about Citi, and I don't say this just to sort of be an advertisement, if you will, but also to demonstrate to you how one of the largest global financial institutions is acting to take an approach to an area that we believe is obviously very promising from simply a business point of view. Citi has been in the African continent now for over 50 years. We first established a presence in Egypt and then grew into what now are 16 different countries on the continent where we have a physical presence and office. We, however, are also servicing 33 other countries on the continent from those 16 presence countries. We've invested over $1.2 billion in Africa in our own operations. That's just for Citibank. And we employ over 2,000 people on the continent. And we're also very proud to point out that we have contributed literally millions of dollars in what in the corporate world we call corporate social responsibility contributions. This is primarily in financial education, in the empowerment of women and micro-entrepreneurship, those types of activities. So having said that, for purposes of the presentation today, I pulled together some disparate sources from Citibank analysis of the continent and would like to share them with you for the purpose of looking forward to, as you say, this 2023. I think they picked it out because it was 10 years from now.
That's a good one.
Round number. It's interesting, and I'm not an economist. I unfortunately am a recovering lawyer who practiced here in town for probably too many years. But it's interesting to read their work product because they point out that the trend lines for Africa actually are pretty difficult to plot. And this goes back easily 50 years. They point out there have been episodes of growth throughout Africa, but unfortunately the episodes are relatively limited in duration. They're only on or about 6 years from their observations. And there were also, as they pointed out in the past, too few countries involved in these growth spurts. However, they then observed that as of the year 2000, on or about, there's been a new era of sustained growth in the continent and expanding development. And I've got a couple of statistics here that point this out. 1981 to 1995, world growth rate was by GDP terms, 3%. In the same period of time, Africa's growth rate was 2%. Then, 1996 to 2010, the world growth rate, average growth rate, was 2.8%. The African growth rate was 5%. Now, this started to mirror what we, at least in Washington, were so marveled at the Asian growth, which is fair. It is. It's spectacular. But the thing that strikes me in my business, my job with Citi, is how little there has been mentioned about the African growth rate and this African growth phenomenon. Our analysts point out now, and this is a bit of a projection, but from 2006 to the year 2020, we're projecting a world growth rate of approximately 3% and an African growth rate of 5.5%. Now, this is not coming from McLean High School. This is coming from Citibank analysts who basically do this in a pretty effective way. So I find that obviously very encouraging. Their assessment as to why this growth rate was so, or is so sustained, why it has become hopefully a bit more entrenched than in the past, they point to greater political stability on the continent. They point to structural growth, such as the mobile phones phenomenon, which in and of itself is one of those technological miracles, as Renosi points out. that can be a game changer so quickly, much like perhaps shale gas and shale oil will for the United States. Commodity prices. It's pointed out there has been a commodity supercycle going on that's now coming to an end, and I think this is a key point for Africa to pay attention to on a country-by-country basis. The supercycle is ending, but the city analysts point out that it doesn't mean all commodity prices are going to plunge. They say we're transitioning from supercycle to unicycle, and they feel that there are certain commodities that will remain buoyant in terms of pricing, while others will probably decline. And of course, in export-driven markets where they're dependent on primary commodities of one form or another, such as oil, that can have a somewhat debilitating impact if the price declines too much. I should point out, though, and this is interesting to me, it came as a surprise as I looked into this. City believes that only about 30% of African growth is actually dependent on commodity exports. So that tells me something. In other words, it's not going to be this potential decline or softening of commodity prices doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be rack and ruin. They also point out something that I think those of us who are observers of Africa in some detail already know, but it is distressing because I'm not sure there's a simple answer to it. And that is, they call it the African sandwich. It's North Africa versus Sub-Saharan Africa versus South Africa. And they point out that the growth rates and the growth in those various regions within the continent are divergent. In North Africa, the projected GDP growth rate is 2 to 4.5%. That's on a country-by-country basis. In South Africa, the projected growth rate in 2013 is 2.8%. But then you take the middle of the sandwich, the Sub-Saharan Africa numbers, and they range from 5.4 up to 8%. So it's a very interesting divergence. Their clue, they think, that to the answer to Africa's sustainability and its growth is in infrastructure. In fact, they wrote, and they're not usually whimsical types who write these things, but they wrote infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure across one line in our report to our customers. That's hardly new news to any of us who watch the emerging markets around the world. The demand for infrastructure development in virtually every single emerging market is immense. Financing it is going to be a huge challenge. And we are really talking about trillions of dollars of proposed projects. The capital is there, but freeing up the capital in the wake of the financial crisis is going to be difficult. The other point that they make about the African economies in general is that there is a very high growth rate for the services sector, which is fine, that's good, but they point out that in manufacturing, those kinds of sectors where there's sustainable employment growth and also that have very large collateral spin-off effects for collateral businesses, that is very weak. So they're emphasizing the need to increase manufacturing. And how do you get there? Obviously, part of the answer is infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. They also point out, and again looking towards 2023, and I'll quickly close, that there are two looming problems that we're now seeing indicators of in the last couple of years. One is a growing fiscal deficit in many of the countries, and the second is a growing number of current account deficits. Now, for the oil exporting countries in Africa, these don't quite manifest themselves, not yet anyway. But for the non-oil exporting countries, they are serious problems, and they have been, in fact, increasing over the past 3 to 4 years. So there's real concern there, as well as potential inflationary spirals that could occur that obviously would undermine standards of living, particularly in the lower income countries. In the future, our analysts basically look to the future of Africa based on its relationships with external parties. They point out that while there seems to be a relative decline of engagement between the United States and Africa, Europe and Africa, They see a significant increase in engagement between the Asian countries and particularly China, which is a topic all unto itself that I'm not going to embark upon. They then, however, point out that there are a couple of sleepers in this. One is the Brazilians have become increasingly interested in the continent in a variety of places. India, likewise, although I, from my own experience, I know India has been very quietly but very engaged in the continent for decades, if not centuries. And then a new player is Turkey, who is coming down with a vengeance, with mostly it's construction, but they are truly focusing on Africa as a new growth opportunity for their businesses. And then our analysts do point out, and I think this is true, this is my own experience heading international government affairs for Citibank. The United States is getting more actively interested in Africa once again. Money talks, growth rates talk, and we are being lured back into and trying to figure out the innovative, the useful, the sustainable ways by which to be engaged in the economies of Africa. And we all know, of course, that there's a diversity of economic opportunities there. And our analysts also point out the Europeans are likewise getting interested. Of course, you know, I'll be a bit chauvinistic and say, well, where the United States goes lately, the Europeans seem to follow. So in closing, I'd say the big challenge for all the governments in Africa right now will be how to manage this increasing interest and the potential for investment. Obviously, the countries, all of Africa, the entire continent, is trying to evolve from a colonial point of view about development. It's trying to get over its own mentality of national barriers. One thing is exceptionally clear to me, and that is that without regional integration, without that ability for countries to come together to create, if you will, common markets that make sense in today's global business environment in terms of potential consumption, in terms of infrastructure development, country by country, the continent will fall apart. Regionally, it's got, I think, great prospects. And with that, I'll stop.
Thanks, Rick. Wing?
Sorry. Thank you very much. I also appreciate the invitation, and I'm glad to be with this panel, the other panelists here. Well, as an economist, I am an economist, so you can imagine I was going to talk about the economic trajectories and all that. And I know that I'm sure the city analysts do look at the work that we do. So part of what has already been spoken, said here is pretty much what I thought. But I think we've been asked to look at, sort of looking at broadly where South Africa is, where South Africa will be heading, and also looking at, the environment, sort of a broad view. And I think even if you're looking at South Africa, these days it's very difficult to focus on South Africa, even if you want to really understand South Africa. You have to really think about it in a global context and also in the regional context. So you need to know where is South Africa within Africa. Because as the numbers cited, the prospects for growth for South Africa on its own might actually be very bad at this point. They are much lower than others. But South Africa has also the opportunity to engage a lot of the other African countries and be able to gain quite a lot. In fact, South African prospects for the future have to be defined, not just with its own policies or what they want to do as South Africa, but what they want to engage the rest of the continent. And I think that's a very important and fundamental in terms of looking where South Africa would be in 2023. Now, I see South Africa, although I focus this, we need to look at South Africa within the context of this Africa growth story that we have actually had to see where South Africa fits in that story. But also, we need to think about South Africa within the global context. It's a country of contradictions, the way I see it. South Africa is within the G20. It's a member of the G20. South Africa is a member of the BRICS, these emerging strong economies. But South Africa is also like two countries. If you go in there, you find that there is a developing part of South Africa and there is a developed part. And in this, between these two countries, which have not seen much change for several years, there has been some improvements, in fact, but there's still major problems within the South African society. The inequalities in South Africa remain some of the worst. But the sad thing about the trajectories within South Africa is that when you measure inequalities, there used to be like white-black in major inequality. What is increasing now is black-black inequality. It is within racial categories inequalities. And what that means that they have a serious social problem that could actually increase over time. The bigger inequalities today are within, the ones that are increasing most are within the black communities. Some doing very well, partly because of the black empowerment programs and other opportunities, but others who are still remain as they were in the old era. And this is a contradictory society that has to move to 23. To achieve the aspirations 23, there has to be something that deals with these particular challenges. Now, as I said, we need to look at Africa within the Africa growth story. It is true that the new growth in Africa is different from the old episodic type of growth. It's been more consistent. It's not necessarily driven by natural resources, although it's true when you think about Equatorial Guinea, you think about Angola, yes, there's a lot of natural resource as the driver. But there has been quite a bit of diversification. There have been new IT applications. Countries like Kenya have been growing and are expected to grow faster, but very little of natural resources. In fact, the fact that I come from Kenya, the fact that Kenya discovered oil might not necessarily be a very good thing at this point. But the thing is, there have been new approaches, there are new diversification that's driving the economies. There are new issues related to all this. There's urbanization. So when you're thinking about where you'll be in 23, there's also thing to look at. Africa is urbanizing faster than any other place. So you have to think out, whatever the 23 you want to look like, or what type of structures that should be, the economic structures, one has to think about an urbanized society. Then maybe just for, of the good part of the stories, the new partnerships are very important. I think my colleague just mentioned that. I mean, the new China is there, Russia to an extent, Brazil is there, and all these, Turkey, even Iran is going there. So the new partners are actually shaping how we do business. And this is important for South Africa and the rest of the continent. I think for the US, you said that where America goes, Europe follows. But it seems like more these days where China goes, America is trying to follow. It looks like President Obama is trying to see what he can do to deal with this Chinese problem, which is actually a big issue here. So I think you have to think about the U.S. These new partnerships are very important. Finally, and again, sort of talking about, sort of adding to what has been discussed here, is the fact that Africa, the new growth model, the paradigm has to do with regional integration, So, and that regional integration is moving fast. Of course, there is South Africa within SADC, and there are all these other regional economic communities. And the idea of a continental free trade area in Africa by 2017, that is not going to happen. But at least there will be movement towards the 2017, towards continental regional integration if you get accelerated integration within the region. So I think to me, and this is the key factor that we actually agree, to be able to do that, and the biggest barrier between Africans is infrastructure, within the countries themselves and connecting these countries. So infrastructure to me, within South Africa, within the South Africa SADC region, how that is connected will be very important. Whether you want to exploit the gas fields in Mozambique effectively, there has to be improvements in infrastructure issue, and then broader. So there are prospects for South Africa by 2023 have to be looked at from this regional and global context and how it moves. But let me say, because this has to do with youth, let me just say a few words. So Africa is in this position where things look very good. It's also the continent, is the youngest continent. So you have the biggest population is the youth, that more than any other continent. Europe, Asia is aging, okay, in those countries. So the Africans then is really have this potential to, as in terms of productivity, or if you can do it, and the wages are rising in China, in Asia also, which means that there are a lot of jobs that are likely to shift south to Africa. So there are great opportunities. Now, the question is, how can we be able to take those positions? But this youth that we are talking about, as a big blessing, can very easily turn out to be a curse, okay? And in many countries in Africa, I'm not going to equate it to the Arab Spring, but what you may find in Africa, if we are not able to create the jobs, if we are not able to open up these opportunities, and you can see a bit of that in South Africa. You can see agitation in South Africa and many other countries. I think if we don't deal with the issue of the youth, we are not going to move. Even these 23 objectives, you just forget about them because there will be chaos and there will be disruption. You know, the cost of doing business in South Africa will increase. So in my view, it's really not just a necessity. It's almost, I mean, it's not just a good thing to do. It's really critically important. Now, technology. We have seen the technology in Africa has done wonders. We see great opportunities. We have now fiber optic cables now have added in many countries. So we have seen an IT type of revolution. We have seen the digital divide sort of narrowing, and there are a lot of digital jobs that are coming up. There are so many opportunities that's associated with technology. So I went through, when I was looking through, preparing for my notes, or more honestly, my research assistant, going through a category of what type of innovations, what are young people doing, and you get this 20-year-old in South Africa has come up with this idea and is innovating. You get all these, there are many, many ideas, and to me, I think the point we need to make here in terms of how technology is that the potential is immense, but there need to be pretty clear government policies to support the youth to be able to exploit this, because they are mind and they are mentally they are pretty good and very creative, but there need to be quite a bit of government support. What I have seen in some countries working now is the creation of innovation hubs with quite a bit of support from government, and I think South Africa need to go through this route. There may be there, but I think there are great opportunities for South Africa and moving to 2023. But that has to be really led by the youth and the opportunities that are available to the youth. Stop there.
Thanks. I think we have enough conversation here to last the entire afternoon, and we're going to jettison the rest of the panels and just stay with us. Now, Runosi, I want to come back to you because Mwenge raised some critically important issues around the contradictions, and since you're on the ground, I'm curious what you think about youth and entrepreneurship. You mentioned mobile as an important part of this future over the next decade. We're seeing it in places like mHealth in South Africa and other arenas. But where do you see the challenges right now? And are these contradictions as important as we've just heard?
You mean the contradictions with respect to the fact that youth are located in different, social conditions?
Inequalities that are inherent in the system of South Africa that have been baked in over the years. I mean, how we begin to overcome them?
I think we are beginning to overcome them, but it's clear that where you grow up, what class you grow up in, the geography of your youth access and the implications of that for access to education and health and so forth it has implications for people's future within South African society. I think what is good is that at policy level, there is a clear vision and effort to, to change that. So I think that one of our challenges going forward is really equalizing opportunities amongst youth, recognizing that diversity amongst youth, and fashioning the appropriate interventions for the different challenges that the youth face. And I think part of that is understanding how technology can, in fact, be used to ameliorate some of those differentiations. So there are programs in the townships, in low-income areas, for example, where incubators are used to encourage youth to come up with innovations. And it seems that those innovations are not necessarily linked to how much education have you had, but by virtue of the way that the youth have been exposed to technology and have been able to use technology, understanding their social conditions, they are able to come up with ways in which that technology can be used, and then working with other partners to take it up to scale or to refine it, to attack particular problems. So I think that understanding how technology can be used to encourage social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, because this is something that young people take so quickly to, so enabling them to get access, not just at the school level, but if they're out of school, using their ability to master technology to enable them to move into it, to become entrepreneurs. And one is seeing a number of types of activities of that kind being generated with the support of government and with the support of other people. But I think that you're correct to point out that the contradictions amongst the youth and the impact of poverty and inequality is something that we have to focus on, quite similarly. And we are not going to be able to do that effectively if we don't have the conversations with the youth. Just like with anything else, if you want to solve a problem, you can't solve a problem without involving the people that are facing that challenge. And it's the same thing with the youth, and I don't think we do enough of that. We assume that as adults, we know what the solutions should be. And yet we can see that when we don't arrive at the solutions that are appropriate for them, they take it upon themselves to find those solutions, not necessarily with good results for everybody, but certainly highlighting what the challenges are, and hence my emphasis that there needs to be those conversations, and we also need to have the different partners. The private sector will do one thing, government will do something else, NGOs are doing something else. But if we put all those resources and ideas together, then I think you have a much more inclusive approach in the first instance, since the different actors are operating within different segments of society. And so you're able to address those contradictions and have much more targeted interventions. So I'm very optimistic about the future. We face challenges, but I think just as we did in 1994, we know that when we come together to attack the problem, we can come up with very good solutions. So it does take time and effort, and that kind of working together, and not assuming that some miracle will happen and that these problems will solve themselves.
Thank you. Rick, were you going to comment on that?
I was just going to make the observation. Yeah, 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Technology, in all the emerging markets that you look at, technology certainly offers a certain leapfrog effect. But I think technology really should be considered as a tool for helping prepare people who are not currently employed, including the youth. This youth demographic bulge is a worldwide problem. And unless you're preparing people for the right kind of jobs within their economy, within their that level of economic development for their country, you can overeducate. I certainly agree there is room for innovation, there's room for technological sophistication in the workforce, in the youth. But I think you can overemphasize that. You know, not everyone's going to be a computer programmer. You need to also educate that youthful workforce to be prepared for the kinds of jobs like in manufacturing that I was mentioning. And that's where technology, too, can have a huge role.
I guess the question I'd ask, using this country as an example, clearly Silicon Valley, among other places, have been drivers of the technology revolution in the U.S., if not worldwide. Some of it has fallen to government, but a lot of it has fallen to private enterprise, too. Right. So the question in a place like South Africa in particular, what responsibility government has versus private enterprise, particularly with the inherent inequalities that the system has grown up with. Where, you know, Renosi mentions, I mean, you have an education system that is still, you know, decades later paying the price of apartheid. Where does the responsibility lie? Would you have a quick answer to that?
There are no quick answers. There are no simple ones, and
45 seconds.
Yes. No, I think I like what Lenos did say about that. It's really not a one person's one organization, government or pub. It is it's really a collaboration. It has to be a collaboration. But to me, I would like to say that governments are very important in creating that environment. But I think it's really important to know that a lot of problems are really solved by are solved not because of people want to do good, but because we want to make money. Okay, a lot of the problems we see in the world are not solved because people want to do good things for other people. Problems are solved because there is an opportunity to make money. Okay, so you should always think about the problems of the youth within the context of how can you have incentive, what we call incentive compatible arrangements. The business makes money and the people get jobs and so on. So I think, to me, the private sector in this is very important in solving a lot of these issues of inequality. And I think just to add something about technology, I would like to say that what I have seen in terms of the innovations by Africans are very different from just academic type of theorizing. What they have done, particularly if you think about the mobile technologies, innovations that have happened in Africa, they look at they focus on a particular problem and say, how can I solve this particular problem? So most of the innovations actually taking place in Africa, the technological innovations in Africa are focused in particular problems that they are facing. Some of them deal with monitoring security, others are, and of course, the communication issues, they are focused on a particular problem. And of course, again, we don't want to say that all the innovations we are talking about should be focusing on IT, because even there seems to be a bias that we focus on IT. And in fact, I think we should be talking about, what are the new technologies for storage facilities. We lose a lot of foods because of lack of post-harvest technologies. We should be thinking about those type of technologies, and people are doing it. We have people, thinking about energy. I think some of the simplest innovations have been using bicycles to charge mobile phones. They use, you have people with their own. I don't know how they do it, but they, in rural areas without power can charge mobile phones through those type of technologies. So I think they are really quite limited. I would say that some of the approaches to deal with this through the private sector, because you need the private sector. Whatever incentives, there need to be real government, the infrastructure. We still have to wait to see our Silicon Valleys that we are doing in Africa, which are these technology cities that are coming up. I mean, if you look at many countries, they are setting up a whole area and they are calling them technology cities. They are providing the infrastructure, bringing the high-speed cables and so on, bringing water, electricity and so on, and then they want those to be technology cities. We will see. I know Kenya more than other places, but I know that we are building our own technology city. We will see how it works.
We've got about 10 minutes left. Why don't we open it up to a conversation? Just remember to wait for the microphone and identify yourself. And we have a question right here. And if you have a specific person in mind to address your question to.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Rosemary Segero. I'm the president of Segero's International Group. I'm a non-profit and a profit. And thank you so much, Mr. Ricks. Thank you to see. My comment and question is, I want to thank South African government so much. I work with a community-based organization for young people in South Africa, and the South African government just donated a property to build a school in Africa. As a Kanban, Mr. Rick, I just created my venture capital fund. My venture capital fund is for supporting women and young people as entrepreneurship, especially into training. We talk about innovation here, as Mr. Kimemi has said. Innovation is not just about technology, cell phones, computer, and whatever. This is what we are forgetting to know with young people. These are leaders for tomorrow. They need to be told technology is even farming, agriculture, things that are economic, building into countries, so that because you cannot force them to be computer scientists, whatever it may be. Yeah. We have others that are doing something like South African Community College I'm working with. They do different things. These are people who come from university who didn't have the knowledge, and they had the knowledge, but the skills for doing things like agriculture, no, they had the knowledge to write and read. So this is where we need to tell the world young people to collaborate as this event here today, Mr. McDonald. I attend all your events here. Next time, I'll put a video conferencing in Kenya, in Africa, so all the young people know what other young people are doing and are saying as entrepreneur. This will help them, motivate them, so that we are on one face. So thank you so much. And how do we work with you? Mr. McDonald, I come to your events. Mr. Rick, you are there, Banga. My venture capital wants some money. And my young people and women. So how do we collaborate? I've said it's not for only the government. It's not only for civil society. It's we need all to collaborate, because we may be doing the same thing, but everybody's speaking differently. And then we don't know who is saying what, but it's the same thing we are talking about.
All right, let's let Rick answer
so
the...
how do we work together from here and next year again when we come?
Rick, you want to take a quick stab? We've got about 6 minutes.
Quick stab at accessing cities' capacities to support you are, when I leave the podium, if you can catch me, give me your card, and I'll put you in touch with our chief country officer, because, as you know, multinationals still have to operate locally, and so the people for you to get to know are the people in Johannesburg.
I'm from Kenya, but
okay, Kenya.
Just one of my...
We've got operations in Kenya, so I'll get you to Kenya then.
I work for East Africa, and then West Africa, and then South
All right. Well, next, you got a question on the end there? Go ahead. Quick question.
Yes.
Make your questions
I'm with
crisp.
Resources for the Future, and I'm particularly concerned about global warming, especially if you're looking forward to 2023. How about the adaptability of agriculture and other things, water resources in Africa over the next 10 years?
Maybe you take several questions.
All right. Well, we'll take a couple of questions. We'll come back to that. Let's have another question. In the back. Just identify yourself.
Yeah, Callisto Madavo. I teach at Georgetown. I had two observations to which I would like the panel to react. The first one is that I very much agree with the sketch given by Citi on the progress, on the recent progress that has been made in the last decade. But clearly this is not enough. Growth rates of 5.5% or whatever is not going to make the difference that we need to make in Africa. And it seems to me that one of the real issues that keeps me awake at night is the instability, the growing instability in Africa. We have terrorism in the West. We have a lot of problems in the Great Lakes area, not to mention the Horn. is this likely to interfere with whatever vision we might have for 2023? And by the way, to the panel, what is exactly the vision that Africa should have for 2023? What action programs would need to be taken? What sort of leadership do we need, including the youth, to get from 2013 to that vision in 2023?
Rick, why don't you take a quick stab, and then Mwangi, why don't you?
This is one of those existential questions. Good questions. On water resources, obviously a critical topic, no matter where you are. If you're an agrarian-based society, you better be worrying about water resources. I mean, as a banker, I can say that we are very interested in any kind of infrastructure projects, and also in helping fund conservation efforts. We've actively gotten involved in that. We subscribe to the Equator Principles, which we're very proud to have helped author for financing of projects. And one of the things that you do, obviously, particularly in emerging markets, I'll take a swipe, sometimes not like the Chinese, is we are very concerned about what consumption of the natural resources entails and how they are going to be used. And is it a sustainable model or not? So from a project development point of view, we're very sensitive to that. And I think most of the responsible banking entities do look at that, look at the business models, look at the feasibility studies. Certainly if the IFC or any of the regional development banks are involved, they also are very sensitive to it. You know, is it the solution? No. You know, that takes a population to be sensitive to these issues.
Rick, I'm going to stop you there. Mwangi, what about the instability issue?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay, quickly on related to that, I think the growth rate. I mean, we are achieving average of 5.5 growth rate for most of the visions that we have. We have, I think, Nigeria 2025, Kenya 2030. There are all these visions that are basically targeting to transform the economies and to achieve the middle income status. You cannot do that with 5%. At the minimum, you need 8% and sustained for over 20 years. Okay, so we are still, Mr. Madiba is very correct that we need to be careful when we talk about the Africa growth story. Until you can sustain much higher rates, then you still have a problem. So that's an issue. Instability, I think, I don't know whether instability is increasing or it's there. I think we have seen there are some good signs. If you think about what has happened in the West Africa, you have Sierra Leone, you have Liberia, you have Ivory Coast. I mean, having major crises that have subsided now, if they can sustain and move forward, then that's very good. In the Great Lakes, we have, this is going to be a problem for a long time. And the centers around DRC, of course. But I think the DRC problem is a problem of richness, okay? And because there are so many actors trying to get a stake with in DRC, the Eastern Congo problems and so on, I think this is a big issue. Ironically, DRC is predicted to be growing, I think, about 8% the next couple of years. If only that you could actually solve the problem of the internal conflicts in Congo, I think that would be a very important country. In fact, it could be an anchor in that country and could bring a lot of potential. But there are so many interests all related to the natural resources there. So that's an important issue.
Renosi, I'm going to give you the last word on the vision issue, which was just raised about how do you get to that over the next 10 years? What do you tell the youth for a vision issue? In a minute or less.
The question of leadership, I think, is critical in all the sectors. Political instability, I think, is particularly debilitating for our progress going forward. And even though there may be a general trajectory where many more countries might be stable, the problem is that some stable countries are fragile and some of the countries where there is political instability are critical for regional integration and for really the transformative things that we all keep talking about as being critical for the continent. I would also say that the advantages that we see from commodity benefits and figuring out how to diversify our economies is going to be an important one, and dealing with the rapid urbanization in such a way that the solutions that we come to help us to address poverty and inequality and improving the quality of life for the majority of African citizens. And so everything that we talk about, whether it's infrastructure, what to do with the commodity windfalls, in my view, the vision for 2023 has to be about reducing poverty and inequality and understanding the importance of leadership to achieve the economic goals that we want to, as well as the political goals that would underpin the environment that enables us to achieve those objectives. And I think that that's what I'd like to see the youth think about. We've talked about technology, but I agree that it is a means to achieving solutions to some of these challenges that we face and we've been talking about.
I think it's a great place to end for 55 minutes. I think we've gotten quite a bit out of that. So thank you very much. And I think we've got a quick coffee break.
And thank you very much, Richard. We'll take a quick break now.